and welcome to EisnerAmper's Private Equity Dealbook podcast series. I'm your host, Elana Margulies-Snyderman, and with me today is Kapila Ratnam, partner with the healthcare fund at NewSpring Capital, a Pennsylvania-based lower middle market private equity firm that invests in business services, manufacturing and distribution, government services, consumer services, technology, and healthcare. Today, Kapila will discuss some of the transactions NewSpring has completed, including Kincell Bio and Aerosafe Global, both in the pharma space. She will walk us through the processes, along with both the opportunities and challenges faced when it came to those transactions. And further, she will discuss how she navigated the due diligence process on those deals. Finally, she will share what NewSpring is looking for in the buy-side process to better ensure that both a mutually beneficial and efficient transaction can be consummated in today's economic and transaction market environment. Before we dive into the conversation with Kapila, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to EisnerAmper wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also find us on YouTube at EisnerAmper. Hi, Kapila. Thank you so much for being with me today.
I really appreciate your inviting me to speak on your podcast, Elana.
Absolutely, Kapila. So to kick off the conversation, tell us a little about NewSpring and how you got to where you are today.
So it was a long and winding road. NewSpring's been around for 25 years. Originally, it started out with a single catch-all growth equity fund. And now we have 5 different strategies, one around healthcare, one around technology and business services, both of which focus on growth equity. We also have a mezzanine debt fund that focuses on lending to the lower middle market. And we have 2 buyout strategies, one focused on technology and business services, and the other focused in on the direct-to-consumer space, mostly in and around different segments of retail, but focus more on the franchising space. I'm a partner with the healthcare fund, and it's kind of easy to see why. My background is very much in healthcare. I have a PhD in biochemistry from way back when, seems like a long time ago. And I spent more than a decade in the pharmaceutical industry, both pharma directly and pharma outsourced services before I joined NewSpring. And I've now been at NewSpring for about 18 years. And at NewSpring, we focus in on services. On the healthcare side, we focus in on healthcare services, is technology-enabled services to the payer, provider, and pharma world. And we will also invest directly in clinical providers who are providing services to patients directly.
At EisnerAmper, we are creative problem solvers that take a 360-degree approach focusing on you. We're an award-winning firm with decades of experience. EisnerAmper. Let's get you ready.
Great. So, Kapila, the investments in Kincell Bio and Aerosafe Global are quite exciting. And I would love to hear the story from start to finish on your process of how you completed those 2 transactions.
Happy to. Let's start off with Aerosafe Global, because that is a deal we've been in for more than a year now. The deal came to me from an existing investor who knew about my pharma experience. And when I first came across the company and he introduced me to the CEO, I immediately understood the value that they were bringing to the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the company focuses in on moving temperature-sensitive drugs from point A to point B. And that point A to point B could be domestic, it could be international, it could be from manufacturer to warehouse to end user. They provide services across the board. And their customers are either the pharmaceutical industry directly or the middlemen, the GPOs, the pharmacies, as well as wholesale distribution companies that help the pharmaceutical industry move drugs from point A to point B. And the reason why I found the company really compelling was when I was in the pharmaceutical industry many, many years ago. I was part of a clinical trial, helping manage a clinical trial where the drugs that were supposed to arrive at a certain site ended up in a different country on a different continent. And so when I called and said what was going to happen to those drugs, and they said, well, they can probably ship them over. And I said, it's too late. They're temperature sensitive. They were sent in dry ice. That dry ice would have evaporated, and the drugs are no longer viable. And so when you have a solution like Aerosafe, where you can track every box through the entire points of its journey, all the different points of the box's journey, and you can track what temperature the drugs were at and whether the drugs are out of spec, that's a huge savings for the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, one of the customers that we spoke to, they said that their goal was to save somewhere in the tune of 900 million of lost inventory over a period of 5 years is what they had calculated. That's a lot for a period of 5 years if you're losing that much of drug inventory. And they said that Aerosafe Global had helped them bring that number down dramatically, and they were anticipating going forward that it would come down even more. And that's why I found this story really compelling. And I think when we moved forward, it was a case of there were already existing investors in the deal, and we knew all of them. So it was easy to pick up the phone and talk to the board members and the existing investors and say, hey, talk to me about the management team. Because at the stage of the companies that we invest in, it's all about investing behind people and the processes that those people have set up. So we did diligence around the management team, around their standard operating procedures, their processes. In this particular case, it was the know-how and the service that was more important than any kind of intellectual property. So that's really what we focused our diligence on. We focused our diligence on cash management because this is a highly cash-intensive business because you have to invest in every contract upfront. So that's where we focused our diligence on. And so it's worked out pretty well. The company it took them a little while to shake off all their kinks and work through all their ups and downs in cash flow, but they signed a couple of really big contracts. They've made inroads into adjacent spaces. It's the pharmaceutical industry, it's the pharmacy. Now they're looking at talking to pharmacy deliveries. It's very interesting. It's an interesting time to watch the management team really come into their own right now.
And Kapila, as a follow-up, what were some of the greatest specific opportunities you saw with the transaction?
So for us, when we look at any opportunity, we're looking at it from a couple of different lenses. One, how big is the market? The second is, what's the management team like? It's a bit of a, have they been there and done that? And then the third thing really is the business model in itself. And the market segment we knew was massive. The top 10 drugs today in the market are temperature sensitive drugs. They're all biologics, whether it's vaccines or targeted therapies or, any which way you look at it, they're all biologics, and most biologics are temperature sensitive. And all the drugs in the pipeline that are being developed today, the majority of them are temperature sensitive drugs. And things that are sitting with the FDA today, they're all temperature sensitive. So the opportunity was massive. The other thing that we looked very hard at was the management team. And I have to say the CEOs really assembled a very, very strong team around him. There were a couple of holes when we did the deal originally. We decided we needed to bring in a stronger CFO who was able to do cash management and forecasting in a much more robust manner. And we needed a much better sales team and a much better head of sales, if you will. And so we knew that there were a couple of holes in the management team that we could bring our network to bear and help fill out. But the CEO was very impressive. He'd been with the company a long time. He knew where all the skeletons were buried. He knew how to sell the concept of what he was bringing and the savings that he was bringing to the pharmaceutical industry. The other piece of it that I have to say, we did not focus on this in diligence at all, but has become very important post our investment, was all their sustainability metrics. They are hyper-focused on how to analyze, how to look at how they're saving, the pharma industry from reusing or I shouldn't say reusing, I should say throwing away one-time use boxes. This company, their boxes can be used on an average 70 times, more than 70 times. So from a sustainability metrics, from a carbon footprint metric, they're tracking everything that pharma is looking for today. And it's become very important for the pharmaceutical industry globally, particularly with other countries leading the charge in requiring pharma to look at sustainability metrics. This company has really hit it out of the park. It was very interesting to look at that. The one thing that we did know going into the deal, because we've had prior experience in pharma services companies, was how cash intensive the businesses are. You have to invest in every contract that you sign. You go, rah, well done, sales team. And you turn around and say, how much cash is the company going to need up front to actually deliver on the contract? And bringing in a new CFO who looked at it from that lens was very important. And it's worked out well.
That's great, Kapila. On the other hand, what are some of the greatest challenges you faced when it came to this transaction?
I would say that in looking at the management team, we knew that finding the right salesperson was going to be a challenge. We also knew that finding that, I've already highlighted the CFO and the cash management issues. We knew that was going to be a problem going forward. It's the two sides to the coin. You sign a great contract and you know that the company is going to eventually deliver on the contract really well. And it's an important contract. And top line revenues are going to be great, but then it hits your balance sheet really hard. And we knew that going in, and we also knew that it was going to be tough to manage without the right people in place. And so we focused really hard on making sure that the CEO had the right partners around him. And when I say the right partners, I mean the right C-suite around him to help him manage those contracts. And the sales team has delivered. And quite frankly, so has the finance team, although it did take a little bit of time to get there. But we did know going in that was going to be a challenge.
Kapila, I know you briefly touched on the due diligence. I'd love for you to take a deeper dive on the due diligence process on the deals.
So we broke it down, at least in the case of Aerosafe, into some standard buckets and some not so standard buckets. The standard buckets was we knew that we needed a partner who was going to go in and help us do a quality of earnings, look at the financial statements, make sure that everything was ticking and tying and that we weren't seeing things that should have been recorded and weren't recorded. Many years ago, there were a couple of people, one actually at Eisner and one at another firm, who taught me early on in my private equity career, it wasn't what was on paper that you needed to look for. It was what was not recorded on paper that you had to look for. And you had to look for unrecorded liabilities. And your colleagues saved me from a big mistake at one point. And so that's something that we were hyper-focused on in due diligence, we're not just looking at the numbers that the company is providing us, but we're also kind of relying on our partners to kind of say, can you look a little deeper and make sure there's nothing there in terms of balance sheet items that have not been captured that will come and bite us later. So in terms of things like that, we rely on our transaction partners to help us with things like that. The other piece of it was diligence on the pharmaceutical industry side. And we really relied on our network to really look at how valuable was this just replacing dry ice in a styrofoam, and people would always choose the cheaper option up front, whereas you knew that Aerosafe was providing a solution that might be a little bit more expensive up front, but in the longer term saved the pharmaceutical industry a lot more dollars. And we did a lot of diligence around how educated the pharmaceutical industry was and how quickly they would adopt the solutions that this company was bringing to the market. So that's what we focused in on.
Kapila, could you discuss what you're looking for in the buy-side process to ensure that a mutually beneficial and efficient transaction can be consummated in today's economic and transaction market?
So I'm going to give you the example that one of my partners uses. He says, and it's a very apt description. He says, we like to partner with management teams where management teams have their hands on the steering wheel, and that the board and the investors are looking at the NAV system and making sure that the management team is going in the right direction and the most efficient way. And it is a very, very apt description of what we're looking for. We partner with management teams. We're not always in the driver's seat. And quite honestly, if I wanted to be in the driver's seat, I would be at an operating company today. I have that background, so it's something that would be easy for me to step back into. But I think as an investor, our job is to make sure that we are watching over the investments that we're making. We're making sure that we are there to help management teams through the pitfalls that we know that they will face, that they know they will face. And a really smart management team is looking for someone as a partner who can open doors for them, help them think through issues, someone who knows the issues that they're facing in the industry that they're playing in, the sandbox that they're playing in. And that's one of the reasons why, you mentioned both Aerosafe and Kincell Bio, and these are both companies that provide outsourced services to the pharmaceutical industry. And that's one of our, it's a segment that we believe very strongly in, simply because of the background, the operating background that I have, quite honestly, and some of my other colleagues have. We come out of the industry, so it's a little bit of been there and done that. And so we know the pitfalls that they're going to face. And really smart management teams are looking for people like that to be their investors and be their board members and be their partners. And it's a mutual decision in every respect. But in terms of the specifics of a deal, we're looking at companies that are doing anywhere between 10 to 100 million of revenue. Not so much focused on the bottom line the day we make the investment, but we need to be convinced that the company can turn to profit. If it's not already profitable, can turn to profitability in a very defined period of time with a very defined amount of capital. So that's really what we're looking for. We invariably always take a board seat. More often than not, we do deals in syndicates. So we tend to be minority investors. Every once in a while, we'll do a control deal where our fund has control, but that tends to be rare. Typically, when we do deals, it's the syndicate that has control of the deal. And so we partner with other like-minded investors to do these deals.
Kapila, we've covered a lot of ground today and wanted to see if there are any final thoughts you would like to share with us.
It's a very interesting time to be in healthcare, and not just the pharmaceutical industry, but, healthcare broadly. there's a lot happening in the world today. And so in terms of diligence, that's the one thing when we're training and teaching our younger members of our team, we spend a lot of time saying, it's not just what's in front of your face, but can you look 10 steps ahead and try and predict what will happen? Of course, none of us can truly do that, but but those of us who've been in the industry for a while, it's all about pattern recognition. You might not have seen this specific thing before, but you will pick up on patterns, on things that you've seen in other deals and say, this is how this is applicable. And so we're spending a lot of time looking at things, saying no to a lot of things, but also saying we need to do a lot more homework before we pull the trigger on a deal.
Kapila, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing your perspective with our listeners.
Thank you for inviting me, Elana. It was fun.
And thank you for listening to the EisnerAmper podcast series. Visit EisnerAmper.com for more information on this and a host of other topics. And join us for our next EisnerAmper podcast when we get down to business.